November is just around the corner, and that means the 16th Annual National Podcast Post Month is fast approaching. Hi, I'm Jennifer Navarrete, founder of NaPodPomo, and I'm inviting you to join the 30-day Global Podcasting Challenge. Whether you're a newbie looking to start your first podcast or a seasoned pro seeking inspiration, NaPodPomo is the perfect place to experiment and try new things. Visit napodpomo.org to learn more. See where podcasting can take you this November during National Podcast Post Month.
So my book is called In Times of War, A Tale of Ardalencor. It's a medieval fantasy novel. Above all else, it's a story about relationships. It's about friendship, family. When the chips are down, how do people show up? Do they take care of the person next to them, or are they more interested in taking care of themselves? So I wanted to write the book in multiple layers. That's probably the strongest thread that goes throughout the book. It starts in the aftermath of a great battle where the country of Ardalencor has been invaded. They've lost the battle, but not only have they lost, part of their army has switched sides and they've joined the enemy. So you have invasion, you have rebellion, and you start to get a sense of what's happened through the different points of view.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have a guest on the show. We're going to be talking about his journey. And just wait till you hear this gentleman's voice. This guy needs a podcast, an audiobook. He needs a radio show. He needs everything, because I would listen to anything he produces. It's an amazing voice. I've set you high, Andrew. I've set you high, but it's amazing. Andrew's here. We're going to talk about his journey. He actually has listened to some of the podcasts, which makes me so happy. Andrew, welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Dave.
See, I told you, everyone, as soon as he talks, you're like, I want to listen to this guy. Andrew, I love your voice. You got the best voice. I want you to consider doing voiceover work. I have people that want to hire people like you to voice intros and outros. They'll pay you money just to talk. So we got to talk afterwards.
This sounds good. I'm intrigued.
I got some people who need you. Okay. I want to get you some money. So thank you for doing this. It's exciting. Tell us about your author journey. Let's go back to the beginning. Prior to becoming an author and writing, what was it for you that kind of gave you the itch to say, you know what, I have something to tell the world. I have something to share. I want to be an author. Take us back to that moment.
It probably began in childhood, just with poring over tales of myth and magic, looking at atlases. That's probably where the first seeds of it started. When it came to writing a novel, I think it was maybe early 2000s, where I'm a big history buff. I was studying abroad. I thought, wouldn't it be cool to write a story about a particular piece of history that I was interested in? And that kind of initial idea stayed with me for a while. It wasn't, you need to sit down and start writing it immediately, but there were different fits and starts, I will say, with writing it. One was the historical research. The other was creating characters that needed to go into a historical setting. I'm a huge history fan. And I think over time, I realized I'm putting new characters into a story that's already been told. And that was a bit of a frustrating experience for me. People write historical fiction. They do it very well. But for me, it was, I love the history. I love talking about history, but in writing something, I feel like the story has already been told. And this would be kind of an ups and downs over a number of years. So if other writers or creators are, listening to this, it's keep going, try different approaches. Don't beat yourself up. Find the story that's going to work for you. So there were a couple of things that coalesced into me writing my novel, which was one, my love of history. One, I do want to write a book. That was always there. That never quite went away, despite the frustrations along the way. Two was playing Dungeons and Dragons. Actually, this wasn't a game that was played in my neighborhood. We played Risk and we played Monopoly. Those were the games we played. Yeah. But a friend of mine introduced me to it a number of years ago. I thought, yeah, I'll give it a try. But what I really liked about it was it's ad hoc storytelling. It's immersive storytelling, and you create the story and all the twists and turns that go with it. So I was like, hey, this is kind of a connection to storytelling that I had done when I was much, much younger. It wasn't necessarily following a specific historical narrative. And then also Game of Thrones, when that came out, which was this multiple vantage point storytelling. And you could move from one dramatic moment with a particular set of characters, and then the next chapter is with other characters. And that solved a huge problem for me with the book I was initially planning on writing in historical fiction was, a primary character and those within his immediate orbit. But if you're following historical events, a lot of it is get to one point, and then if it's following an army, that army is going to sit somewhere for several months. And what do you do to fill the time? And a lot of times in these historical fiction, the main character becomes a spy or goes on secret missions or has these side projects. And for me, I was like, that methodology has already been used. But when I saw Game of Thrones, you can jump from point of view to point of view, keep the action, keep the pacing, and not these long lulls between dramatic moments. So to me, it was wanting to write a book, Dungeons and Dragons, as a guide to say this is an easy thing to do. Right? You can lean into this. And then the Game of Thrones series had come out. I've listened to the books, The Song of Ice and Fire, and those three things together said it's been 20 years since you had the kernel of an idea. It's time to sit down and actually write this.
One of my favorite things to read when I was younger, which was a long time ago, was the Choose Your Own Adventure series, where in the book you could decide to go to this page and continue the story here, or go to this page. And the story changed depending on your choice. And it was that option, that you had an option as a reader to redirect the story to wherever you think you want to go next. And I was always curious about what was happening on the option I didn't choose. Because here I'm following the path of the story now with my choice, but always wondering what could have been if I had gone the other way. So I like the idea of curiosity in a story and options. So I kind of like, I'm leaning to that when you're talking, that as you're speaking, I'm reliving those choose your own adventure style books. So is that a little bit of what interests you, is kind of telling a new story?
Yeah, most definitely. I'm flashing back to being in the local library with those choose your own adventure books, and either putting a bookmark or, keeping a finger where the junction point was. Okay, if this story doesn't work out, because some end well and some not so much, how do I go back and retrace my steps? Put a little dog ear in the corner or something like that. Yeah, that rings a bell a lot. I read a lot of those books too.
Amazing. I like that. I'm glad that we have that connection. That's great. We talked in our pre-interview around the fact that you have been listening to some of the episodes, which I truly appreciate that you have listened to some of the podcast episodes. That means a lot to me.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you for hosting this and giving writers a platform. Thank you, Dave.
It's amazing who I get to talk to. And the nice thing is you get different perspectives from different guests. And you've been listening to some episodes and you hear some people talk about the way they approach writing. And then you mentioned to me that you see things a little different around world building and some of the things, your thoughts. So I'd love to do this because now we get a different perspective on maybe a topic we've covered with other guests, but I get to hear your version of kind of how you do things that may differ slightly from another author's perspective. So let's kind of go down that path around world building.
Yeah, that's great. My first and foremost rule of storycraft or world building is build the world you want and tell the story you want. I think it's great with the infinite possibilities to have a story and to tell your story. So in terms of craft options, I think it's about choices, not necessarily right or wrong, but just what direction do people want to take their story. And I think there's a couple things that go along with that. One is just from the storytelling. Is it an allegorical story? Meaning, is the setting or the world more of a vehicle to convey a morality tale, to convey certain lessons, certain messages, and the world itself is less emphasized than the messages that are being conveyed. And I think there's a spectrum on that side to more of the world building, which is in addition to having a point of view and messages that you want to impart as part of your story, there's a sense that this world exists independent of the story, that it has its own logic, its past, present, and a trajectory to it as well. And then that's kind of the first question of where do I want to fall along this spectrum? And, how much time do I want to put into world building? It's certainly an enormous and unending labor of love. And I think that's kind of the first piece. A story like There's a Troll Under the Bridge could be a story about confronting challenges, overcoming obstacles. It could be a good versus evil story. A lot of ways you could take that. But in an allegorical story, it's less important where this troll came from. It's more, this is an obstacle that's been chosen as part of this. And this is the basic of campfire storytelling, right? This is the stories that stick with us. But to take a different view of it is in more of a broader world building context. Is there just one troll in this world? If this troll was such a nuisance, why haven't local knights or the local villagers come through and resolve the situation already? What's happened here? And I think with questions, especially when you're embarking in a creative endeavor, I think in general, when somebody says, I have a few questions for you, or how would this work, or why is that? Oftentimes, and myself included, you bristle a little bit and say, what do you mean? Why are you telling me? I think people can sometimes take questions as no, or this won't work. In part of my world building journey of figuring out the world, I started with a story concept, a few characters in a high level story concept with an inciting incident, and then built the world along as I went. But asking those questions is more about, tell me more. Tell me how this works. And there can be different permutations as to here's a little bit of nuance, or it works in this case, but there's a few exceptions. And you get a better sense of the world. And then you can also spin off some of those threads. Well, that could be a new character, or that could be a character's backstory. And thinking through those ways of world building is just a different way of approaching storytelling. For me, I wanted that challenge coming from a love of history, as well as myth, magic, the grand storytelling tradition, and liking those stories since I was a little kid. But I wanted to have that challenge of building an immersive world where, it's a fantasy story, but people say, this is real. I feel like I'm there along with these characters. And I think what goes with that is setting your world up versus setting your world in motion. And this is something that helped me as I was building this place. I didn't know, you can only know the world through building it, right? You can't experience it unless it's through questions or through examples or through the characters. But thinking through the difference of setting your world up, which is like, what are all the components? What are all the ingredients that I want to put into this? And setting your world in motion, which is, I have all my ingredients, but depending on how much I utilize or the cooking process, it's going to affect the outcome in terms of the taste, the presentation. So, for example, another allegorical story is St. George versus the dragon, right? That's your quintessential good versus evil, the hero's journey, like the story that continues to pull people back to storytelling, right? It's very simple, but it's extremely powerful. And we think about the imagery of that story, where it's often St. George on horseback in a very, very close struggle with the dragon. And he's either has already stabbed him with his lance or is about to. But it's this very much close quarters. You're confronting evil, like this very, very important struggle that's going on. But if we take a step back and think about it from a broader perspective, if you're telling a story about a dragon slayer, well, then you need a dragon. But is the dragon there? Maybe from an allegorical standpoint, it's evil that will be overcome. But if in the world context, if you have a dragon that can fly and can breathe fire, and then you have a knight who's charging at it, let's just say, we'll set this as the scene, a knight is charging across an open plain at this dragon. It's a very iconic scene. I think everybody's picturing it, or you've seen that before.
Yeah.
But if the dragon can fly, and can breathe fire and has any kind of self-preservation mechanism, then it should lift off and roast the knight before he ever gets close. So in the world, is your dragon being its best dragon? Or is it a vehicle to impart a certain lesson? And there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's just simply, what kind of story do you want to tell? And I think thinking through the other pieces of the world and how do these things fit together. Now, does that mean that St. George can never kill the dragon? No. It just means let's think about different ways or other obstacles he may have to overcome to get to a situation where it's that close quarters combat, and that's the finale. So it's thinking about what are all the other pieces of the world. Oftentimes, sometimes we think, what would the main character do? Or what would be a dramatic moment for that character? But I think with immersive world building is, how do all of these other things, not that they do everything perfectly, but if they have certain advantages, how do they try to use them as well?
It seems like there's a danger from an author's perspective that your audience just understands and assumes the story, and you don't have to explain it. You don't have to go there. Again, as you're talking about the dragon just rising up and roasting the knight as he rides towards him, that just makes sense. Like, why don't they just do that? The story's over. So what is it about the dragon? Is the dragon injured? Can the dragon not fly?
Yeah.
What's keeping the dragon from doing that? Like, how does that happen? And you just make assumptions that your readers just know that this is what's happening. And without saying it, I don't think that the readers get the full breadth of what you're trying to communicate as you write. So you're opening my mind to, like, why don't they just remove the troll from under the bridge? Why do they allow this troll to keep tormenting the villagers? Nobody thought to do anything about it. Does this troll come from a land of trolls, and he's one that represents many? I don't know. And I've never thought of that before. So you're making me rethink some of the things that I've never questioned as I read somebody's work before. So I like where we're going.
And it's not to say that those things can't happen. But for me, and the challenge I set for myself, and there's not a troll under the bridge in my story, but just as an example, I think part of talking about writing or any kind of creative pursuit, or what are some examples that help illustrate the point, is what are some of the additional steps that we can build into this world? Like you said, what if the dragon is injured or preoccupied, or there's been a whole series of events that have gone on? You also build the drama that we can't just charge this dragon. We have to try something else. What has worked in the past? What can we think of? So in some ways, it's an intellectual challenge as well, which I enjoyed, with having different factions and subgroups within each faction kind of all vying for their own place in the sun. In my story, of matching wits with these different characters and what would they do was really fun. A lot of the enjoyment of writing the story.
It's great. So let's go there. Let's talk more about your story. Unpack a little bit around the book. Let's share the title of the book as well. And as for a reader coming to your book for the first time, kind of what are your hopes and anticipation that us as readers are going to experience when we open and start reading chapter 1?
So my book is called In Times of War, A Tale of Ardalencor. It's a medieval fantasy novel. Above all else, it's a story about relationships. It's about friendship, family. When the chips are down, how do people show up? Do they take care of the person next to them, or are they more interested in taking care of themselves? So I wanted to write the book in multiple layers. That's probably the strongest thread that goes throughout the book. It starts in the aftermath of a great battle where the country of Ardalencor has been invaded. They've lost the battle, but not only have they lost, part of their army has switched sides and they've joined the enemy.
Wow.
So you have invasion, you have rebellion, and you start to get a sense of what's happened through the different points of view. The book starts in a forest with rank and file members of the army who have fled. They've somehow survived, fought their way out. They fled to a nearby forest. And they're trying to figure out what has happened and more importantly, what do they do next? And some people they know, some are complete strangers. But again, they realize no one is coming to save them. So how do we save ourselves? Then you hear from the rebels, the traitors, and their point of view. And the day has gone very, very well for them in many ways. The Royal Army has been put to flight. They have the momentum, they have the advantage, but not everything has gone according to plan. And then another point of view that you hear from is the royal camp, the High Lord of Ardalencor. He's the king or the ruler. And he's lost 80 or 90% of his army. And what does he do next? So you have action, drama, intrigue, different factions, politics, but also if I look to the right or look to the left, who's next to me? And are they on my side? Or even if they tell me they're on my side, are they truly, and who can I count on? Are a lot of the main themes that go throughout the book.
I love this. What part of writing this book was the most satisfying for you as the author?
I think it was putting in those disruptive elements like magic and thinking about how would this society work just at a base level, depending on the level of magic. I restricted the amount of magic and kept it very closely controlled, or at least that's what those who understand it most try to do, is keep it under tight wraps. But then to think about, one, how does the society work, as I mentioned, but then also in combat or in intrigue or clandestine activity, where would these magical elements start to come into play? How could they be counteracted with multiple factions all trying to win with their own advantages and disadvantages? How do these things come together in a way that's logical, in a way that there's drama, action, suspense, and not, well, if they had this extreme power at the beginning, why didn't they just use it in chapter 1? And trying to think through those, thinking of corollaries, or if this is true in the story, well, why can't the opposite be true? Or what is the negative corollary of that? This is true because the opposite is not true. And thinking through those things. So that was a lot of the joy of putting that together, and the massive world building, all of the gears within the watch. I guess it would be an older watch, but all of the gears and the timepiece fitting together and moving along to give the story that clean finish.
Kind of a Games of Thrones relationship there too, with the intro, with the clock. Yeah, I guess good. Was there parts where you were writing and you were faced with your own option to create your own adventure as you're writing, back to our original opening thoughts around that book in the series of Create Your Own Adventure books? When you're writing, do you have this point where you've written yourself to a crossroad and now you're sitting here deciding, am I going to go left or right in my story? I wasn't anticipating this crossroads. Did that happen at all during the writing of the book?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I started the idea of the book with 2 characters, and I said, how do these characters know each other? They probably don't. How would they have met? They met in an army, but they didn't know each other. And then what happened with that army? The army lost the battle. Not only did they lose, but there was this betrayal. That's where I started. Like the name of Ardalencor, other characters, the factions, that I started with just that concept and built everything out. And there were times where I'd have to stop writing and just do world building to figure out how all these things fit together. But to your point, where how do these broader forces work? I'd have to do a lot of thinking. And some of it was either with character arcs or just the world. I remember with one particular character, I did get stuck, and I just said, write down every conceivable option, including they drop dead right now, to all the other permutations. And they weren't going to drop dead there, but just to kind of free my mind of what are all the possibilities And then it was, okay, this will be the thread that this character follows along. So there's the world as the backdrop, but then also how do the characters fit inside of that world? But yeah, there were times where it's like, I have to stop, figure out what's going to happen next, and do it in a way. There are some with the novel, working on book 2 now and envisioning a larger series. There are some threads that, pay off in book 1, somewhere it's clearly obvious that they will pay off in the second book or shortly thereafter. And then little hints as well about longer term developing threads that go throughout that. And part of that is, what is the world building process behind it that enable some of those story threads as well.
Do you start your writing process from the beginning of the path with no idea where the path is going? Or do you start with, I have an end goal and I have to figure out how to get to the end of my story?
It was really starting with, I have no idea where this is going to go.
Oh, wow.
And that was a great departure from me after thinking about writing historical fiction, where in a sense, I know where everything has to go if the characters are going to be part of history. And I started with, okay, do I have enough of a basis of the world and the cast of characters, knowing that I could add, here and there, but is there enough breadth to the world that from this I can spin off and create the different storylines and characters and build the story. But I tried to think, what would these characters do next? Given their motivations, given where they are, what would they do next? And obviously thinking about it as well about what is the flow of a novel? What is the pacing? What is a good ending point as well? But I actually had to change what I thought would be the ending of the book, because part of it was the initial discovery and I didn't know where the story would go, but you get, a fourth, a third into the story. And it's like, where am I trying to vector all of these threads to meet up, or at least to continue to progress and go in new directions. But I found what I thought was going to be the climatic moment of the book. Like, I don't think the characters, some of them wouldn't be in this location. They would do something completely different. So an outline started to develop more as writing book 1 occurred. And then how do I keep things tight within this? But some of that changed based on what I thought the characters would do, what they were telling me in a sense. We wouldn't be here. We would be in this other location because that's more important to us. We're not doing this because you think it would be a dramatic moment for us to be here. We would actually be here. Okay. So how do I create a dramatic moment knowing that they've taken a different course? So new chapters emerged, new twists emerged. And I think along the way, it became not I'm stuck, because there were certain moments where I'd feel I'm stuck, but I'll figure it out. I've spent enough time with these characters and understanding the world that I can figure out different options with it. Wherever they may go, I can figure it out. But some characters I would write myself to a place where, I think they have to die at this point unless I can think of something that is plausible but unexpected. I think I would try to describe my writing as that way, that it's plausible, that there is a coherence and a logic, but also to keep people turning the pages and on the edge of their seat, what's going to happen next, to try to balance those two things.
So your characters were actually communicating with you through the process in a way. What did you learn from your characters as you developed the story that you didn't know about your characters at the beginning of writing?
I think particularly for the rebels, it was they have to win as quickly as possible. They have made an alliance with this invading power, and they don't completely trust them either. So they have to move with speed at all times, even if it means pushing themselves beyond what they think is their limit, because they want to control Ardalencor. They don't want to destroy it. So we have to create a crisis. We have to get rid of the current High Lord, but we don't want to rule over a pile of rubble. We want this place for ourselves. So how do we move as quickly as possible? And part of that was I wanted them to be in a certain location, but they would be stagnant at that location. Like, no, they wouldn't do that. They would try to win as quickly as possible, which then I think increases the tempo of the story. Like, here's the villain, here's the aggressor, and it's just relentless. And whether you hear from their point of view or you're hearing from people who are on their back heels, I guess all heels are back, but back on their heels, reacting. And I like that dynamic, and that made the story even more rich as well. That now there is this additional attention that these characters are saying, we're trying to win as quickly as possible, and we're going to try to find the shortest route. Now, whether they're successful or how successful they are, that'll play out in the story. But that was, if you're going to put these characters who are serious about what they're trying to do, and you give them certain tools to do it, whether it's magic or they have a very professional army or they have the element of surprise, have them try to use it to the best of their ability. Not that they do it perfectly, not that they always do it right. They have their own flaws and competing priorities as well. But how do you package all that together to tell this? And I think some of this there's maybe a lot more explanation in terms of the world building and kind of describing the process, where this might just be a sentence or two in the book, just a line, just to calibrate, just to contextualize some things. And that was kind of the joy as well. Here's all this thought process that I have that leads to one line in the book as well, in terms of how do I convey this to the reader? Because part of it is nobody understands the world as well as you do. You want the world to be welcoming, and this is something that I can understand, and not just throwing a lot at the reader, but doing it in a way where the characters grab the attention, the story grabs the attention, and then you can layer in these other elements of world building.
That's great. For new authors listening, early days of writing their book, they are looking for inspiration, some guidance from another author that's already done it. It's one thing to listen to a podcast or read a book about writing a book. It's another thing to actually do it and do it successfully and have a published book. Your perspective as an author to benefit those listening today, what would you say to a new author that's here listening to our conversation and they just need some gentle guidelines, some guardrails for their writing process from your perspective? Anything you can offer to a new author?
I think I would go back to what's the story that the individual wants to tell. And I think being clear about that up front, just I wanted to embark on a very immersive, multi-point of view, interwoven storyline. That was going to be the challenge for me. I think it depends on how complex of a story or world does somebody want to create. There's no right or wrong answer there. But I think understanding this is the kind of story I want to write. What's the theme? What's the tone? I don't know if I have a great answer for that, just because a lot of it probably depends. I think vectoring in on what kind of story do you want to tell? And then if it's more of an immersive world building, I think there's approaches with that we've talked about. But I think writing a story that you enjoy writing, that's captivating for you, that pulls you back to the notebook or to the computer, is probably the most important thing. And it's finding that story. I think sometimes for me, it was, you got to write this historical fiction. Ultimately, that wasn't where I found my most creative expression. Like I actually like working off of a blank page versus, here's the rigid structure of historical precedent and historical accuracy. I liked being able to mix, match, and create. But I think it's finding a story that captivates you would be the first and foremost. And then there's certain craft rules, but sometimes rules are made to be broken. If you can break them better, I think I think that's always good. Put a new twist on things. But I think that's maybe a hard question for me to answer in its entirety as just general advice.
Yeah, I like that. No, it's good. It's it's a point of reference that people can now use as a guide as they write. Andrew, I have one more question for you here at the end, but again, I want people to connect with you and your book and you as a writer. So where are you most active on social media, and also where's the book available and your website? It'd be great to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, the book is available on Amazon. That's probably the best place to get it. In Times of War, A Tale of Ardalencor. I'm most active on Instagram at ardalencor. And then also, if you're interested in more longer form world building and writing tips, I have a Substack, andrewzimba.substack.com. It's called Fantasy World Building. But my name is in the URL, and more tips, more suggestions around just my experience with world building and writing as well. That's hopefully helpful for others.
Yeah, I think we could spend hours talking about this, Andrew. And I love your input as well. The one thing I wanted to end off with, one more question for you, is your thoughts, your idea about what makes a good story. What's a good story element, and how do we craft a good storytelling experience for our listeners and our readers?
That's a broad question. It's a good one. I would say whatever is going on in the story, is it compelling enough that the reader says, I want to find out what happens next? And is it written in a way that's almost pulling the reader? And I have to find out what happens next. Each sentence is pulling me to the next one.
I like that. And when you talked about in your story, the pacing, right? Making sure that the story's moving forward, and you have characters that make that pacing mandatory. So that's written right into what you're doing. And so there's an element of, this is an ongoing, quickly moving story, and you need to keep up as a reader. I like that idea that you're not just pulling us along, you're kind of pushing as well. Like, hey, the story's moving, keep up. So I like how you've built that into your story as well.
I think there's always a sense of tone and pacing, of slowing it down at times as well. I think my answer is a lot of times it depends, but I think there is truth to, I was reading something about how to write a movie script many, many years ago. And it says in the first 5 minutes of your movie, something very dramatic needs to happen. And it's probably not even at the 5-minute mark. It's probably much sooner than that. But I think getting people interested in the story, like, let's speed it up. And then once there's an interest, if you need to slow it down at different times, because if it's always fast paced, then you kind of lose the sense of fast pace. But pulling people in initially, and then they're willing to ride some of the ebbs and flows, I think is the most important thing.
I like it. Andrew, it's so great to have you on. And again, thank you for your support listening to the podcast.
Absolutely.
That means so much for me as a host. I'm happy to hear your thoughts and your suggestions for the show. That means a lot to me as well. And I'm looking forward to this episode being out there, and you get to hear yourself.
It's great
on the podcast, which is going to be very surreal, I believe. But I'm so glad to have you part of the Living the Next Chapter family, and to be able to promote what you're doing. And please keep me in mind as you continue to write.
Absolutely.
New books coming. I would love to have you back and continue the conversation and continue to promote the amazing things you're doing. And again, your voice is amazing. I hope you find many opportunities, and I'm going to send people your way, but it's a great to meet you and make this connection.
Likewise.
So thank you for making time to be on the podcast.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate it. Thank you for having this platform for authors. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Everyone go check out the show notes. Everything's there. Please support Andrew and his book. When you buy the book, leave an amazing, well-thoughtful, detailed review of the book that lets people know how amazing Andrew's writing is. And let's share that with the world. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you, Dave.
Hey, thanks for checking out the latest episode of Living the Next Chapter. I'm so happy to bring on these amazing authors and to share their stories, but I do have to confess I have a problem. And people who know me best would say, Dave, you have more than one problem. My problem is I have more episodes than I can release to you through my audio host, but I have a solution for you. Oh, yes. Head over to our YouTube channel. Subscribe today to our YouTube channel, and you can get the most recent episode. I'm posting this episode today that I recorded today, and you can get it now on YouTube. Jump the line, move right past that big burly guy at the door. You can get right in and get the most recent episode of Living the Next Chapter on our YouTube channel. Make sure you go there. livingthenextchapter.com has all the information. And again, I want to thank you for making this podcast such a great joy to create. Catch you on the next one.